Hi, my name is Chamel Deavis and I'm here to say why regulation is the best way to ensure ethical behavior in a corporation and within an individual.
Hello, my name is Roshan Samar Singh and I'm here to talk about regulation is not the best way to ensure the ethical behavior of corporations and individuals.
Being a professional individual or even a corporate entity, ethical behavior is crucial. So, what is ethical behavior? One could simply define ethical behavior as doing what is right. It is important for us to identify the harm unethical behavior by businesses could have on the society and take measures to prevent unethical behavior and promote ethical behavior. I believe in order to ensure professional individuals and corporations' ethical behavior, regulation is a necessity. Regulations are unethical behavior could be defined in a broad way, which could consist of combination of laws, rules, principles, and even conceptual frameworks that are implemented by different government bodies, such as the government and ASIC, and so on. It is important for corporations and individuals to recognize that conceptual framework does not merely provide a set of assumptions, values, or definitions. It is also a guideline for organizations to recognize and apply principles to ethically critical situations. Regulations would also work as protection against dishonest trading, where competitors and other stakeholders of the corporation would suffer. A good example would be the subprime loans that were issued by the organizations such as Lehman Brothers before 2008 global financial crisis. They were able to take advantage of loosened regulation on lendings which was led by pure self-interest of the corporation and its executives. But by renewing and introducing more strict regulations such as Basel III, after the 2008 global financial crisis, the chances of such misfortunes happening would reduce. Ethical behavior of corporations is meant to promote human welfare. In incidences where there may be conflicts of interest between the public and the corporation, it is important to be able to restrict the actions of the business by intervening in order to protect the public's interest. Thus, it is important to implement regulations to prevent unethical behavior that may be caused by self-interest, incompetency, and conflicting interests. Thank you.
Even though some of the points given by Chamel are accurate, but I do not agree 100% with him. Regulation is designed to control or govern the behavior of people, and these rules are being developed by an authoritative independent body. But the question is, are these regulations always match the expectations of people or the society? Answer is no. It is important to understand that the regulation is not the best way to ensure the ethical behavior, because most of the time regulations only reflect one side, and there are most of other things to be considered, such as living standard and culture. On the other hand, most of them are money-oriented and especially created to fulfill the one party's expectations. Therefore, regulation is not the best solution, and it has to be a person-oriented method. And when considering all these facts, ethics take a main place in society, and from the recent scenarios, it shows that neediness of moving to ethics rather than dependent on regulation. Ethical decision is depending on the person's background, because what is right or wrong depends on where they have raised and their values of the society. The difference between an ordinary decision and ethical one is the point where rules no longer serve. Values and judgment play a key role in ethics decisions.
And I believe he said some crucial and important points, but I would like to also point out that without regulations in a system, there would be without regulation, without legal obligations or a framework, there would be too much freedom for individuals and also the corporations to conduct their business in. By not having such obligations to bind to, there would certainly be more corruption in the society, unfairness in the society, and practices conducted in order to overcome competition in a more unfair and more corrupt way. There would also be more cases of corporations that would act in self-interest compared to when there is regulation. One of the main examples of this situation would be when managers, executives would try to manipulate financial reports in order to present a better image of the corporation and of themselves, that would give an advantage to the executives to have to advance their own self-interest. But such action would clearly have negative effect on the outside stakeholders, such as the investors or the potential investors who would try to look into the accounts of the business to get a clear picture. Without proper regulations and frameworks and principles governing the action of the individuals and corporations, there is too much risk of experiencing unethical behavior.
Thank you, Shamal. And as you mentioned, but I believe first of all we need to decide why regulation is not the best way. In order to find the answer for that, we need to find out who develops these regulations, even though they are being developed by an independent body. As they are human beings, while they develop the rules and regulations, we cannot say that they do not consider their personal interest, and there is no method to prove it. And on the other hand, to develop the regulation, the authority is given by the government, and in some instances they might have to fulfill the political needs as well. That means they are politically motivated. Not only that, when we develop the regulations, we often need to consider the opinions of all the parties that get affected, and we rarely see, and sometimes the legislation can be misguided by the law. As I have mentioned above, role of the regulation is supposed to make the lives better, but we need to rethink about if that really happens. When it comes to ethical behavior of individuals and corporations, in most of the scenarios, government employees try to control the behavior through regulations. Mostly the regulations are implemented after a collapse in society or the market that didn't fare well, as we expect, and due to lobbying groups as many reasons. And as Shamil has mentioned in his second point about implemented regulations, even though more regulations introduced after Lehman Brothers scenario, no one has been jailed or punished, and no matter how many rules and regulations are introduced, such as Sarbanes-Oxley Act, but they should prosecute, otherwise it will be a bad influence for the others. And on his next point, he has mentioned about self-interest take part. The ultimate goal of organization is to maximize the profit and work according to fulfill the requirements of all the interested parties. Especially in USA, being a rule-based country, there were very strict rules and regulations, but still Enron and Arthur Andersen worked in order to fulfill their personal interests from shareholders' money. And if Sharon Watkin wasn't there, the scenario would have been more bad in the corporate world. And commitment comes from employees who are involved in the organization, willing to make personal sacrifices for the organization. The more company dedication to ethics, the greater the employee dedication. Concerns include safe work environment, competitive salaries and benefit packages, and fulfillment of contractual obligations. There are a lot of loopholes in the regulations when it comes to preparing financial reports, even though they are prepared under rules and regulations. Therefore, it is important to consider about CSR and code of ethics in today's organizations.
In the globalized world today, it is important to consider the ethical behavior internationally and consider the cross-cultural knowledge and implement them in the business world. First of all, let's look at what is culture. A culture could be defined as ideas, customs, and social behavior of particular group of people or a society. While these cultures could vary in different degrees from one group to another, it is important to understand that business environment would consist of members from different cultures who would possess ideas, values, and beliefs that may not be so similar to one another's. But the cultures of the people involved in business activities would help determine the implied business culture of organization. Business culture is the beliefs and behaviors of the employees and management that would determine how the business would interact with the external entities. While organizations have their own business cultures, it is important for leaders of these organizations to understand the different cultural influences of different businesses in order to successfully compete in the global market. Cultural influences of business would have an impact on the business ethics of the organization. Leaders of organizations would today have to be more of ethical leaders, as it is important to understand ethical differences of two organizations in two parts of the world. The importance of such ethical leadership is the same when it comes to organizations itself. as an organization could be consisting of employees and other stakeholders from varied ethical backgrounds. For such leaders, it is important to understand specific values of individuals, and organizations are influenced by different cultures they are brought up in. In more Western societies, such as the US, the concept of universalism is common, where the role of family becomes more fragmented. On the other hand, particularism tends to be more common in Eastern societies, where family and community feeling is more common. In relation to business practices and regulations, it is important to understand set frameworks of rules and regulations would not always be the perfect fit for all societies and groups. A prime example of this would be the United States, where they refuse to adopt the generally accepted Basel Accord standards but implement a version of their own to protect their financial institutions. This is mainly because of the different cultural beliefs that exist within two parts of the world.
And cross-cultural context. Culture describes a collective way of life or way of doing things. It is the sum of attitudes, values, goals, and practices shared by individuals in a group, organization, or a society. And culture varies over time periods, between countries and geographic regions, and among groups and organizations. And culture reflects the moral and ethical beliefs and standards that speak to how people should behave and interact with others. As mentioned above, what is right or wrong depends on where they have raised. As an example, the French and Americans have different views on whistleblowing, which was their main reason in Enron. And compared to the French, American companies consider it to be a natural part of business, so natural in fact that they set up anonymous hotlines. The French, on the other hand, tend to view whistleblowing as undermining solidarity among co-workers. Another fact I would like to mention is countries like Germany, they tend to speak louder when sharing their opinions. But countries like Japan, they prefer to speak softly, therefore it is not ethical to speak louder in their corporate meetings. As we all know, bribery is illegal and not ethical in most of the countries. But there are some countries that bribery takes a main place, as in Colombia. One of the best examples is that TAB opened their gaming centers in Colombia, and from the investigation it was found out that they bribed the officials in order to establish them. Even though there are rules, it couldn't be avoided. It was more of an ethical scenario. And also Islamic banking has a different perspective for European and American banking. Important to mention about Australian perspective and Australian perspective from rest of the world. It will be slower than usually, as the work environment in Australian business culture is collaborative. Top management will consult the subordinates, as you can see in the slides. Australians do not find it hard to say no, so the answer will be clear and straightforward, whereas in some countries they do not say no directly, but they say like, I'm afraid or something like that. And popular welcome topics include weather, sports, Australian football, AFL in Victoria, and National Rugby League, NRL, South Wales and Queensland. Anything related to Australia in a positive way is a good conversation starter. And on the other hand, not that Australians use colourful language that would be unacceptable in other countries, because Australians tend to use sort of slang language in their conversations, but in some countries it is considered as a taboo.
Even though I believe that Niroshan made some valid points, but I still believe that a world without a regulation would cause more corruption and more unethical behavior. So in my opinion, regulation is a necessity for ethical behavior in the corporate world. Thank you.
Like I mentioned above, I still believe that regulation is not the best way to ensure the ethical behavior of people, because I believe we need to change the pattern of how people think about others and how people think about themselves, because they need to focus on what is best for the society, not what is best for themselves. Therefore, ethics and ethics programs and CSR programs are the best way to ensure the behavior of the people. Thank you.